The planet's surface was unlike anything Commander James Carter had seen before. The ground shimmered faintly, like crushed gemstones under a pale blue sky. His boots crunched against the glittering soil as he stepped out of his damaged spacecraft. The gravitational anomaly had forced him to crash land here, and now he was stranded on an uncharted alien world with little hope of rescue. James scanned the horizon, his helmet's visor feeding him basic environmental data. Breathable air, mild temperature, low radiation. At least he wouldn't die immediately. His ship, however, was another story. The hull was cracked, the engines fried, and the communications array utterly destroyed. Perfect, he muttered, brushing some dust off his gloves. Stranded in paradise. As he moved toward a nearby ridge, hoping for a better view of the area, a strange sound stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't the wind or the creak of his suit. It was something deliberate. Footsteps. James turned quickly, his hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm holstered on his hip. His eyes locked onto a figure emerging from the shimmering mist. It was tall, easily 7 feet, with a lithe frame and smooth, silver skin that seemed to catch and reflect the faint sunlight. Its eyes glowed a soft blue, like twin stars, and it walked with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Human. The figure spoke in a voice that was melodic yet firm. James stiffened. The alien wasn't just approaching, it was speaking his language. That fact alone sent a dozen alarms ringing in his head. His grip on the pistol tightened as the alien stopped a few meters away, its glowing eyes studying him with an intensity that made him uneasy. "Who are you?" James demanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. The alien tilted its head slightly, as though puzzled by his reaction. "Do you not recognize me?" James blinked. "What?" The alien took a step closer, and James raised his weapon. "Don't move," he barked, but the creature ignored his warning. "I am tireless," it said, placing a hand over its chest. "Of the Erythian Keep." The name meant nothing to James. "That's great, but I've never met you. Now stay back." Tyrillus frowned, her glowing eyes dimming slightly as if in sadness. "You truly don't remember," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "After everything we have been through." James lowered his weapon just slightly, his confusion growing. "Look, I think you've got the wrong guy. I've never been to wherever this is, and I've never met you." Tyrillus shook her head slowly. "No, it is you. Your form may have changed, but your essence is the same. I would know it anywhere." James frowned. "My form, my essence, what are you talking about?" "You are the one who saved my people," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You are the savior who stood with us against the Zorkal Dominion. You are the one who swore to protect the Erythian Keep. You are my bondmate." James took a step back, stunned by the weight of her words. "Bondmate? Lady, I don't even know your name until 2 seconds ago." Tyrillus's expression turned from sorrow to frustration. "Your mind is clouded," she said, almost accusingly. "Your memories are buried, but they are there. I can help you find them." James raised his pistol again. "Listen, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm not interested. I'm just trying to figure out how to get off this rock, not deal with whatever this is." Tyrillus didn't flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes for a moment, her breathing steadying. "I see your fear, human. I see your confusion. But the universe has brought you back to us for a reason. Whether you believe it or not, you are needed once more." James couldn't decide if she was delusional or just plain dangerous. Either way, he wasn't sticking around to find out. He started backing away, his weapon still aimed at her. "I'm leaving. Don't follow me." "You cannot run from destiny," Tyrillus called after him, her voice steady, but filled with sorrow. James ignored her, turning and making his way up the ridge. But as he climbed, her words echoed in his mind. "Do you remember me?" What kind of question was that? He had never been here, never met her. And yet, There was something unsettlingly familiar about her presence. At the top of the ridge, James stopped to catch his breath and look back. Tyrillus was still there, standing in the same spot, watching him with those glowing eyes. Great, James muttered to himself. Stranded on an alien world with a glowing 7-foot stalker. Just my luck. But even as he tried to shake off the encounter, a nagging feeling refused to leave him. What if she was telling the truth? What if there was more to this than he could understand? For now, though, James focused on survival. Whatever Tyrillus wanted from him, he wasn't about to let an alien dictate his next move. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the alien landscape as James sat by the wreckage of his ship. The faint hum of its cooling systems filled the air, a reminder that he was still stranded on this strange world. He had been thinking about the encounter with Tyrillus all afternoon, replaying the bizarre conversation over and over in his mind. "Do you remember me?" The words haunted him, like a puzzle he couldn't solve. After some time, James decided he needed to know more. He couldn't shake the feeling that Tyrillus wasn't just some random alien who had lost her mind. There was something about her, something in her eyes, that made him pause. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't lying. He didn't know how she had followed him to his crash site, but there she was again, standing at the edge of his ship's debris. This time, her posture was calmer, more assured. Her glowing blue eyes locked onto his, like she was waiting for something. "Why are you here?" James asked, his voice weary. "And who are you, really?" Tyrillus stepped forward slowly, her silver skin reflecting the fading light. "I told you, I am Tyrillus of the Erythian Keep," she repeated, her voice soft yet unshakable. "And I came because I need your help. Your people, your past self, helped save mine." James frowned. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a guy from Earth. I'm no hero, and I definitely haven't saved anyone. Certainly not your people." Tyrillus didn't seem angry, but there was a sadness in her gaze. She folded her arms across her chest, as if deciding how best to explain. "You don't believe me. That's understandable. But please, let me show you the truth." James hesitated. "Show me the truth." "How?" "Through your memories," she answered simply. "You are not who you think you are. Not completely." James felt a chill run down his spine. He had no idea what she meant by that. Was she some kind of mind reader, or was she just playing some elaborate trick? Before he could voice his concern, Tyrillus continued. "I know you don't remember, but I do. You were once a soldier, a warrior for the Erythians. You fought alongside us during the Great War against the Zorkel Dominion." "The Zorkel?" James repeated. "What are you talking about? That sounds like something out of a bad movie." Tyrillus smiled faintly, her eyes narrowing, as though she was searching for the right words. "It is not a story, human. The Zorkel are an empire of ruthless conquerors who spread destruction across the galaxy. They came to our world centuries ago, seeking to enslave us. But your people, the humans, came to our aid." James stared at her, still trying to make sense of her words. "Wait, you're saying humans fought alongside your people, and that I was one of them?" "Yes," she said simply. "You fought with us, leading our forces against the Zorkel. You were not the only human to come to our aid, but you were the one who made the greatest impact." James shook his head. "I'm not a warrior. I'm not a leader. I'm just a guy who flies a ship for a living." He gestured to the wrecked vessel behind him. "Clearly, I'm not good at that either." Tyrillus stepped closer, her presence calming despite the intensity of the conversation. "You do not remember because the memories have been lost to you. But they are there, buried deep inside. You can feel them, can't you?" James paused, feeling a strange stir in his chest. A small part of him, the logical part, dismissed it. But another, more primal part of him, felt an odd pull. Something about Tyrillus's words made his heart race. "Do you ever get a feeling?" she asked, sensing his hesitation. "A feeling that there's more to your life than you've been told? That you're meant for something bigger?" James frowned, struggling with the confusion inside him. He couldn't explain it, but there was a strange sensation, a distant, almost forgotten memory, tickling the back of his mind. It felt like a part of him had been missing, like a puzzle piece that had just fallen into place. What exactly happened during this war? James asked, his voice quieter now, as if speaking the words aloud would make them more real. Tyrilus's expression softened. The Zorkel were fierce. They'd ravaged our cities, killed many of our people. Your kind, the humans, came when we were at our lowest. You had heard of our plight, and you sent a small fleet of ships to help. You led the charge at the Battle of Zithar, the turning point of the war. The Battle of Zithar, James repeated, his mind racing. The name felt familiar, like something he had heard once in passing, but the details remained vague. You don't remember it yet, Tyrillus said with a hint of sadness. But you were a key figure in that battle. You fought with us, side by side, as though you had always known us. Together, we struck down the Zorkel leadership and stopped their advance. James's mind was spinning. Could this really be true? Was he some kind of reincarnation of a past warrior? It seemed absurd, yet the strange sensation inside him refused to go away. Tyrillus reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. I know it is hard to believe, but you are the one who can save us again. The Zorkel are returning. Their empire is rising once more, and they seek the weapon we hid long ago. James blinked. Weapon? What weapon? Tyrilus's eyes darkened. The weapon you sealed away with your very life. The one you swore would never fall into the hands of the Zorkel. James's head spun as he tried to process it all. His past life, this supposed war, the Zorkel, it was too much to take in at once. But one thing was clear. His encounter with Tyrillus was no accident. He had to decide whether to accept her story and fight, or to walk away and continue his search for a way home. Think, human, Tyrillus urged, her voice both gentle and firm. The past is calling. Will you answer? James couldn't sleep. The night was quiet, but his mind was in turmoil. He lay on the ground near the wrecked remains of his ship, staring up at the stars, though they seemed distant and foreign now. His encounter with Tyrillus kept playing in his mind like an endless loop. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her glowing blue eyes, her voice echoing, "Do you remember me?" It wasn't just the strange words that had gotten to him. It was the overwhelming sense that there was some truth in her claims. He felt an uneasy connection to her, something that tugged at his very core, but it made no sense. How could he be someone else's reincarnation? How could he possibly have been part of some ancient war? James sat up, rubbing his face with his hands. He needed answers, and it seemed the only way to get them was to trust Tyrillus. The next morning, Tyrillus was waiting for him. She stood in the same spot where he'd last seen her, her posture calm and dignified, as if she had not moved an inch since their conversation. The soft glow of her eyes was the only hint of movement in her stillness. "James," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "It is time to begin. The memories are there, waiting to be unlocked." James hesitated. "You really think I can remember all of this? A past life, some big war, and fighting alongside your people?" He shook his head. "This all sounds crazy." Tyrillus stepped closer, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "I know this is difficult for you to accept, but trust me, the memories are already inside you. We will unlock them together." James looked at her for a long moment, then sighed, realizing he didn't have much choice. He couldn't move forward without answers. "All right," he said finally. "Show me." Tyrillus nodded, her eyes briefly closing. She took a deep breath and reached out, touching his forehead gently. The moment her fingers made contact, a strange warmth spread through James's body, starting from the spot where she touched him and moving outward like ripples in water. His heart began to race as something inside him stirred, something ancient, something powerful. Suddenly, his vision shifted. He was no longer standing on this alien planet, no longer looking at Tyrolus. Instead, he stood in a vast, war-torn landscape, surrounded by unfamiliar ships and weapons. The air was thick with smoke, and the distant sound of explosions rumbled in the background. The ground beneath his feet was scared, and the sky above was dark with clouds of fire and ash. He looked down at his hands, only to find that they were no longer his own. The hands were stronger, calloused, and covered in the dark armor of a soldier. A warrior. A flash of memory hit him, a memory of a battle, fierce and brutal. The sounds of gunfire, the cries of soldiers, the shouts of commanders. A war, his war. He was there, fighting for the Erythians, leading their forces against the Zorkil Dominion. James's breath quickened as the vision grew clearer. He was standing on the front lines, his eyes scanning the horizon. The Zorkil were advancing, their monstrous ships descending like vultures. The air was thick with tension, the fate of the Erythian people hanging in the balance. He was the one giving the orders, the one leading the charge. Hold your ground. His voice thundered across the battlefield, as if the command came from deep within him. The soldiers around him rallied, moving with precision, following his lead without question. He could feel it, the power, the weight of the responsibility. The lives of thousands were in his hands. He was the leader. He was the hero. But then, something changed. A deep, booming voice echoed across the battlefield. You cannot win this war, human. James turned and saw the towering figure of a Zorkil general. The creature was monstrous, its body armored and covered in dark, jagged scales. Its eyes were like burning coals, filled with malice. You fight for nothing, the general sneered. We are the Zorkil. We conquer worlds. We take what we want. James's heart pounded. This was the enemy, the force that had nearly destroyed the Erythians. His grip on his weapon tightened. We fight for freedom, he growled, his voice filled with defiance. We fight for our people, and we will never give up. The battle that followed was chaos. James led the charge, pushing forward even as enemies fell around him. Every movement was calculated, precise, instinctive. His body moved on its own, driven by years of combat experience he didn't remember having. He fought like a man who had been born for this moment. Just as he was about to strike the Zorkil general, a powerful explosion shook the ground beneath him. The force sent him flying backward, his vision going black for a moment. When he regained consciousness, he was lying in a crater, surrounded by wreckage and the bodies of fallen soldiers. But it wasn't over. The memory faded, replaced by another. James saw a figure, a woman, standing before him. She had glowing blue eyes and silver skin, just like Tyrolus. But this woman wasn't just a stranger. She was his bondmate, the one he had sworn to protect, the one he had shared everything with, the one he had lost. You cannot save us alone, she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. The weapon must be sealed. You must make the ultimate sacrifice. The memory faded again, leaving James breathless, his heart pounding in his chest. The vision broke, and he was back on the alien planet, standing before Tyrolus. His knees felt weak, and his head was spinning from the flood of images and emotions. Do you remember now? Tyrolus asked softly, her eyes searching his face. James looked at her, his breath steadying. He wasn't sure if he could fully process everything he had seen, but one thing was clear. The war, the sacrifice, the weapon, it was all real. He had lived it. I remember, he said, his voice hoarse. I remember it all. Tyrolus's expression softened, relief washing over her face. Then you know what must be done. James nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand it all, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just some ordinary man from Earth. He was a warrior, a leader, and he had a duty to fulfill. The Erythians were depending on him again. And this time, he wasn't going to run. James stood at the edge of the ruined battlefield, his mind still reeling from the memories that had surged through him. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of a nearby rock, trying to steady himself. The visions of the war, of the battle, and of the woman, his bondmate, were still fresh in his mind, as if they had happened only moments ago. But they were ancient memories, locked away deep within him until now. Tyrillus watched him quietly from behind, her glowing eyes never leaving him. She had been patient, allowing him to process what he had seen. But now it was time for the next step. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. James turned to face her. He felt different, like a part of himself had been awakened, but he still had many questions. "I'm not sure I understand everything, but I know we don't have much time. You said something about a weapon. What is it, and why do I have to be involved?" Tyrillus nodded, her face serious. "The weapon is the key to ending the Zorkel threat once and for all. It was hidden long ago by your people and ours, after the Great War. It was too powerful to remain in the wrong hands, so we sealed it away. You swore to protect it." James frowned. "A weapon that powerful? What could it do?" Tyrillus stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "It is a force unlike anything the Zorkel have ever encountered. The weapon is capable of erasing entire fleets, entire civilizations. It has the power to destroy the Zorkel, to break their hold on the galaxy." James felt a chill run down his spine. A weapon that powerful could change everything. But why was it tied to him? And why me? Why do you think I can control it? Tyrillus's expression softened. "Because you were the one who sealed it away. You were the one who made the ultimate sacrifice to keep it from the Zorkel." The words hit James like a physical blow. "What sacrifice?" he asked, his voice low. Tyrillus hesitated for a moment, her gaze shifting downward. "You sealed the weapon in the heart of the Erythian homeworld, where no one could reach it. But you also bound it to your very soul. When you made the sacrifice, your memories were lost, locked away. So the Zorkel could never find you. So they could never find the weapon." James shook his head. "I sealed a weapon away in my past life, but I have no memory of it. How do you know I'm the same person?" Tyrillus stepped closer, her voice gentle. "I remember you. I remember us. You were my bondmate, the one who stood with me against the Zorkel. We shared everything, even our souls. And now you must remember once more." James felt a strange tug in his chest as Tyrillus spoke, but the feeling was mixed with confusion. It didn't seem possible, yet something inside him whispered that she was telling the truth. "Okay," he said, his voice steady despite his growing uncertainty. "So, where is this weapon? And what do we need to do to stop the Zorkel from finding it?" Tyrillus's expression darkened. "The Zorkel are already searching. They know the weapon exists, and they will stop at nothing to find it. They believe that with it, they can finally conquer the galaxy." She paused, taking a deep breath. "We must reach the location before they do, but it won't be easy. The Zorkel will send everything they have." James's mind raced. He couldn't shake the image of the Zorkel general from the battle he had seen in his vision. The creature's cold, merciless eyes haunted him. The Zorkel were ruthless, and if they got their hands on that weapon, there would be nothing left to stop them. "What do we need to do?" James asked again, his voice firmer now. "We need to go to the heart of Erythia," Tyrillus said, her voice serious. "It is the only place where the weapon is hidden. The Zorkel will be coming, and we must beat them there." "Heart of Erythia," James repeated. "Where's that?" Tyrillus nodded. "It is a temple, deep within the mountains of the Erythian homeworld. Only a select few know its exact location. The map to the heart was lost, but there is a way. We must retrieve the ancient key that unlocks its hidden entrance." James looked at her, trying to understand. "An ancient key. Where do we find it?" "There is an artifact, hidden in the ruins of an old Erythian city. It is said to hold the key we need to enter the temple. The city is in the northern region, past the shattered plains. But we cannot waste time. The Zorkel will be looking for it too. James took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their mission settling on his shoulders. He had a duty, a responsibility, one that he had never asked for but was now part of. The fate of this world, and possibly the galaxy, rested in his hands. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "We'll go. We'll get the key, find the weapon, and make sure the Zorkel don't get their hands on it." Terelis's eyes brightened with gratitude. "Thank you, James. You do not know how much this means to me, to all of us." James nodded, feeling the fire of determination building inside him. He wasn't just some pilot from Earth anymore. He was a warrior. He was the key to stopping the Zorkel, and he wasn't going to let them destroy everything. "Let's go," he said, looking toward the horizon. The journey ahead would be dangerous, but it was one he had to take. For the Erythians, for the galaxy, for the memory of who he once was. The wind howled across the barren plains as James and Terelis stood at the edge of the shattered plains, looking out over the vast expanse. The ground before them was cracked and uneven, the remnants of ancient cataclysms long past. Jagged rocks jutted from the earth, like the bones of a forgotten giant, and in the distance, the shadow of a mountain range loomed, where the ruins of the old Erythian city lay hidden. James tightened his grip on his blaster, feeling the weight of their mission settling heavily on his shoulders. The Zorkel were out there somewhere, searching for the ancient key that would unlock the temple where the weapon was hidden. He couldn't afford to let them find it first. The stakes were too high. "We have to move fast," Terelis said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but James could hear the urgency beneath it. "The Zorkel won't be far behind. We need to reach the ruins before they do." James nodded. The pressure of time weighed on him, but he could feel the determination in his chest. He wasn't going to let anything stand in their way. As they began their journey across the shattered plains, the landscape seemed to grow more desolate with every step. The air was thin and dry, and the sun beat down relentlessly, making the journey feel even more grueling. But James pushed forward, following Terelis through the rough terrain. They didn't speak much as they walked. Terelis, with her glowing blue eyes and silver skin, moved with a quiet grace, as if the land itself yielded to her presence. James, on the other hand, struggled to keep his footing on the unstable ground. His mind was still reeling from the memories he had unlocked, the memories of his past life as a warrior, the battle against the Zorkel, and the weapon that could destroy them all. He had always been a man of science, a pilot with no interest in war or conflict. But now, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, he couldn't afford to be hesitant. He had to embrace the soldier he once was, even if it didn't feel natural. Hours passed as they crossed the plains, the sun beginning to dip lower in the sky. The shadows grew longer, and the temperature dropped, but the journey didn't stop. Terelis finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "We're getting closer. The ruins are just ahead." James looked toward the distant mountains, trying to see through the haze of dust and wind. He couldn't make out anything clearly, but the sense of urgency in Terelis's voice told him everything he needed to know. The key they sought lay hidden within the ancient city, and they couldn't waste any more time. They continued their trek, moving faster now. As they neared the foot of the mountains, James's senses were on high alert. The terrain was even more treacherous here, with sharp rocks and narrow paths winding through the rocky cliffs. But Terelis led the way with confidence, her movements precise and sure. Finally, they reached a narrow pass between two towering cliffs. The entrance to the ancient city lay beyond, hidden deep within the mountain range. James could feel his heart pounding in his chest as they approached the entrance. The city, long forgotten by time, stood before them, its crumbling walls and broken structures barely visible against the mountain's rugged backdrop. It was a place of ancient power, a place that had once been the heart of the Erythian civilization. Terelis stopped at the entrance and turned to face James. "The key is inside," she said, "but we must be careful. The Zorkel are likely already aware of this place. They will stop at nothing to find the key. James nodded, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his blaster. We'll deal with them if we have to, he said, but we can't let them get the key. Tyrolus gave him a small, approving smile. We'll need more than just weapons to get past the traps inside. The city is ancient, and many of its defenses are still active. James's brow furrowed. Traps. Yes, Tyrolus said, her voice becoming more serious. The Erythians built this city to protect the key. They designed it to be nearly impossible to navigate without the proper knowledge. But I remember. She paused for a moment, her eyes distant as if recalling something from long ago. I remember the paths, the hidden doors, the dangers. I can guide you through them. James's heart raced as he followed her into the city. The ruins were eerily quiet, the only sounds the crunch of their footsteps on the dusty ground. The walls were covered in ancient symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of old stone and forgotten history. Tyrolus led him through the city's winding streets, carefully avoiding the crumbled structures and hidden pitfalls. Every now and then, she would stop and examine the walls or the floor, tracing the symbols with her fingers as if she could sense something the human eye couldn't see. They came to a large open courtyard at the center of the city, surrounded by towering pillars. At the far end of the courtyard stood a massive stone door, its surface covered in intricate carvings. It was the entrance to the chamber where the key was hidden. Tyrolus stopped in front of the door and turned to James. This is it. Beyond this door lies the key. James felt a surge of anticipation, but also unease. The Zorkel could be closing in. Every minute they spent here put them in greater danger. Tyrolus placed her hand on the door, and the carvings began to glow brightly. Slowly, the massive stone door began to open, revealing a chamber beyond. The walls inside were lined with ancient relics, artifacts from the Erythian civilization. At the center of the room, on a pedestal, was a small glowing object, the key. As James stepped forward, his hand instinctively reached for his blaster. He had a feeling they weren't alone. The sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows. Tyrolus's eyes widened in alarm. They're here. James turned to face the darkness. The Zorkel were closer than he had feared. The final showdown was about to begin. The hairs on the back of James's neck stood up. The sound of footsteps grew louder, echoing off the ancient stone walls of the chamber. The Zorkel were close. He could feel the tension in the air, thick like a storm just before it broke. Tyrolus's face was filled with determination, but her eyes held the same unease that James felt deep inside. We have to move fast, she whispered, her voice steady despite the danger. If they get the key, it's all over. James nodded, gripping his blaster tighter. The key, glowing faintly on its pedestal, was within their reach, but it didn't matter if they couldn't get to it before the Zorkel did. They had to protect it, no matter the cost. Suddenly, a dark figure stepped out of the shadows at the entrance of the chamber. A Zorkel soldier, tall and menacing, his scaled armor reflecting the dim light of the room. The creature's burning red eyes fixed on James and Tyrolus with a predatory intensity. Leave the key, the Zorkel soldier growled, his voice deep and cold. It belongs to the Dominion. Tyrolus stepped in front of James, her silver skin glowing even brighter in the dim light. You will never have it, Zorkel, she said, her voice calm but filled with authority. This key is the last hope for the galaxy. You will not get your hands on it. The Zorkel soldier sneered, stepping further into the room, his armor scraping against the stone. You Erythians always think you can stop us, but we are unstoppable. He raised his weapon, a long dark staff, the tip crackling with energy. James didn't hesitate. He fired his blaster at the soldier, but the shot was deflected by a shield that shimmered around the Zorkel's body. The soldier didn't flinch. Instead, he lunged forward with unnatural speed, swinging his staff at James. Tyrolus moved in an instant, her hands glowing with energy, as she intercepted the attack, her body moving fluidly like a dancer. The Zorkel soldier's staff collided with her energy shield, sending sparks flying. But she held her ground. She pushed back, forcing the soldier to stumble. "Get the key," she shouted to James. "I'll hold him off." James didn't need any more urging. He sprinted toward the pedestal, his heart racing in his chest. The chamber felt like it was closing in on him, the walls growing tighter with every step. The key was just a few feet away now. But the Zorkel soldier wasn't done. He swung his staff again, aiming for Tyrillus, his movements quick and deadly. She blocked his strikes, but it was clear the soldier was gaining ground. The battle was fierce, and James could feel the weight of every second ticking by. They didn't have much time. As James reached the pedestal, he hesitated for just a moment. The key was small, no larger than a fist, but it pulsed with an otherworldly energy. It was ancient, more powerful than anything he had ever seen, and it was theirs to protect. He grabbed it, feeling a strange warmth spread through his fingers. The moment his hand closed around the key, the chamber trembled. The walls groaned, and the ground shook beneath his feet. Tyrillus yelled, "James, now." James didn't waste a second. He turned, sprinting toward the entrance as fast as he could, clutching the key to his chest. The Zorkel soldier roared in fury behind him, but he was too focused on getting out of the chamber alive. Tyrillus was right behind him, her energy shield flashing as she blocked another strike from the Zorkel. She was giving everything she had to protect him, but James knew she couldn't hold him off forever. The exit was just ahead. James's heart pounded in his chest as they neared the doorway. But as they reached the archway, a second Zorkel soldier appeared, blocking their path. This one was even larger than the first, with jagged spikes protruding from his armor and a vicious grin on his face. "There is nowhere to run," the second Zorkel soldier snarled. "Hand over the key, and we might let you live." Tyrillus stepped forward, her eyes glowing with fierce determination. "You'll have to kill us to take it." James felt the cold grip of fear clutch at his chest, but he pushed it aside. This was the moment he had prepared for. This was what he had to do. He raised his blaster, taking aim at the second soldier. The first soldier was already charging toward them, his staff crackling with energy. There was no time to waste. Tyrillus held her ground, her energy shield pulsing with light as she deflected another blow from the first soldier. "James, you have to go. I'll buy you time." James's pulse quickened. He couldn't leave her. They were in this together. He fired his blaster at the second Zorkel soldier, but the shot bounced harmlessly off the creature's armor. The soldier snarled and charged, raising his massive weapon. Tyrillus's eyes glowed brighter, and she shouted, "Go now." James hesitated for only a second, but it was enough. The first soldier lunged at Tyrillus, and James saw the opening he needed. He made a dash for the exit, the key still in his hand, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Behind him, the battle raged on. Tyrillus was holding her ground, but James knew she couldn't keep it up for long. The door to the outside was just ahead. The light of the setting sun spilled through the archway, a beacon of hope. James bolted toward the exit, the Zorkel soldiers hot on his heels. He could hear their footsteps behind him, the heavy thud of their armor and the sound of their weapons charging. But he didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. As he burst out into the open air, the wind whipped against his face, carrying the dust and the smell of battle. Tyrillus was close behind him, but the sound of the Zorkel's pursuit was still growing louder. They had the key. Now they had to survive long enough to use it. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the shattered plains. James and Tyrillus stood at the entrance of the ancient city, the weight of the key heavy in James's hand. The Zorkel soldiers were still on their tail, their pursuit relentless. Every step they took, every moment they wasted, brought the enemy closer. "We need to get to higher ground," Tyrillus said, her voice sharp and filled with urgency. "The Zorkel will catch us if we stay here." James nodded, his eyes scanning the barren landscape ahead. The mountains loomed in the distance, their jagged peaks casting dark silhouettes against the blood-red sky. They had to get to the Erythian safe house, an old stronghold hidden deep in the mountain range. It was their only chance to protect the key, to make sure the Zorkel couldn't use it against them. "We have no choice," James said, determination rising within him. He turned to face the mountains, his heart pounding. "Let's move." Tireless was already moving, her steps quick and sure despite the danger. They crossed the plains in silence, moving as fast as they could while keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. The Zorkel were close now, their heavy footsteps echoing behind them like a dark promise. As they reached the base of the mountains, James looked over his shoulder. He could see the shadows of the Zorkel soldiers moving closer. They were relentless. There was no time to waste. "Keep going," Tyrillus shouted, her voice carrying through the wind. James pushed forward, his legs aching from the long journey. He wasn't a soldier, not like Tyrillus, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let her down. He had to protect the key. He had to stop the Zorkel. The mountains loomed larger as they climbed, the path becoming steeper with each step. James's breath came in ragged gasps, but he pushed through the pain. Tyrillus was ahead of him, her glowing form a beacon in the growing darkness. Suddenly, a loud, screeching noise filled the air. James's heart skipped a beat. He turned to see a Zorkel shuttle descending toward them, its dark shape cutting through the sky. The soldiers had called for backup. They were running out of time. "Get to cover," Tyrillus shouted. James dove behind a large rock, his pulse racing. The shuttle landed with a deafening roar, its engines kicking up dust and debris. The Zorkel soldiers disembarked, their weapons raised and ready for combat. "There's no way around this," James muttered to himself. He couldn't outrun them, not now. Tyrillus stepped out from behind a rock, her hands glowing with blue energy. She took a deep breath and faced the Zorkel soldiers. "You want the key," she shouted, her voice carrying through the air. "Then come and take it." The soldiers advanced, their eyes burning with fury. Their leader, a towering Zorkel with a jagged scar across his face, stepped forward, his weapon crackling with energy. "You're brave, Erythian," the leader said, his voice like a low growl. "But bravery won't save you." Tyrillus's eyes narrowed. "I don't need bravery. I just need to stop you." With a sudden movement, she raised her hands, unleashing a blast of pure energy. The wave of force struck the Zorkel soldiers, sending them flying backward. The leader was knocked off his feet but quickly recovered, growling in anger. "Impressive," he spat, wiping the dirt from his armor. "But it won't be enough." James felt a rush of fear, but he knew they had to keep fighting. He couldn't let Tyrillus face them alone. He stood up, his blaster in hand, and fired at the nearest Zorkel soldier. The shot hit its mark, but the creature's armor absorbed most of the impact, leaving it mostly unharmed. Tyrillus moved again, faster than James could follow. She ducked under an incoming strike from the leader, her movements fluid and graceful. With a swift motion, she sent another blast of energy toward him, forcing the leader to stumble backward. But the battle was far from over. The Zorkel soldiers regrouped, surrounding them on all sides. James felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. There were too many of them, and they were closing in. "We need a plan," James shouted over the sounds of battle. "We can't fight them all." Tyrillus didn't answer right away, but her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw something in her gaze, a glimmer of the warrior she once was, the bondmate she had been to him in another life. She nodded slowly. "We don't have time for a plan. We fight, or we die." With that, she launched herself into the fray once more. Her energy blasts flew in every direction, lighting up the darkened sky. But the Zorkel were relentless. The leader of the Zorkel soldiers raised his weapon, a large charged cannon, and aimed it directly at Tyrillus. "No," James shouted, fear gripping him like a vice. Without thinking, He ran toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't let them kill her. He leaped in front of her just as the cannon fired, the blast striking him square in the chest. The force of the explosion knocked him off his feet, and he slammed into the ground, gasping for air. His vision blurred, and he could taste blood in his mouth. "Tireless," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He could feel the warmth of the key in his pocket, a reminder of what they had to protect. Tireless was at his side in an instant, her energy shielding him from the next blow. Her face was a mask of concern, but there was no time for grief. She helped him to his feet, her strength steadying him. "We can't stop now," she said, her voice low and fierce. James nodded, his vision clearing. His body was sore, his chest burning from the blast, but he wasn't done. Not yet. The Zorkel soldiers were still advancing, but they were slowing down. He could see it in their faces. They were beginning to realize they weren't going to win this fight. And then, in a flash of inspiration, James understood what they had to do. He pulled the key from his pocket and held it up toward the sky. Its glow intensified, lighting up the entire battlefield. The energy from the key rippled outward, creating a barrier of light around them. The Zorkel soldiers froze, their weapons lowering in confusion. The key was responding to him. It was more than just a weapon. It was a force, a tool that could shape the very fabric of the galaxy. And with that realization, James made a choice.